Hello. This is John T. Rhapsodes Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories. Today I bring you the Judkins Papers, a short collection of funny observations from around 1913 from a young Hoosier country boy and his father, collected and written down by James Whitcomb Riley. Riley walked the earth from 1849 to 1916, mostly in Indiana. He was a prolific poet and focused on Indiana Hoosier dialect and humor. The comic strip Little Orphan Annie was based on Riley's 1885 poem. If you like awesome old-school audio stories from old minds that were once young minds, brought to you free of charge and with a happy and grateful heart, consider while listening to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications to get notice of new stories. Some funny, some spooky, all awesome. Usually at least once a week. These simple acts will help this channel immensely. And now, hear the words of old. The Judkins Papers, from 1913, by James Whitcomb Riley. Father and Son. Mr. Judkins' boy came home yesterday with a bottle of bugs in his pocket, and as the quiet little fellow sat on the back porch in his favorite position, his legs elbowed and flattened out beneath him like a letter W, his genial and eccentric father came suddenly upon him. "And what's the blame boy up to now?" said Mr. Judkins, in an assumed tone of querulous displeasure, as he bent over the boy from behind and gently tweaked his ear. "Oh, here, mister," said the boy, without looking up. "You just let up on that, will you?" "What you got there, I tell you," continued the smiling Mr. Judkins, in a still gruffer tone, relinquishing the boy's ear and gazing down upon the fluffy towhead with more than ordinary admiration. "What you got there?" "Bugs," said the boy. "You know." "Dead, are they?" said Mr. Judkins. "Some of 'em's dead," said the boy, carefully running a needle through the back of a large bumblebee. "All these uns is, you can bet. You don't think a feller'd try to string a live bumblebee, I reckon." "Well, no, Squire," said Mr. Judkins, airily, addressing the boy by one of the dozen nicknames he had given him. "Not a live bumblebee? A real stem winder? Of course not. But what in the name of limpin' Lazarus are you stringin' 'em fur?" "Got a live snake feeder dragonfly," said the boy, ignoring the parental inquiry. "See 'em down there in the bottom, with all the other ones on top of 'em? Just watch 'em now and you can see 'em pant. I can. Yeah, and I got a beetle that's pert nigh alive too, only he can't pull in his other wings. See 'em?" continued the boy, with growing enthusiasm, twirling the big-mouthed bottle like a kaleidoscope. "I hate beetles," continued the boy, "'cause they always act so big, and make such a fuss about themselves, and don't know nothing neither. Bet if I had as many wings as a beetle, I wouldn't let no boy my size knock the stuffing out of me with no bunch of weeds like I done 'em." "How'd you know you wouldn't?" said Mr. Judkins, austerely, biting his nails and winking archly to himself. "Why, I know I wouldn't," said the boy, "'cause I'd keep up in the air where I could fly, and wouldn't come low down at all, bumping around amongst them bushes and buzzing against things and butting my brains out of trying to get through fence cracks." "'Spect you'd rather be a snake feeder, wouldn't you, bud?" said Mr. Judkins suggestively. "Snake feeders has got about enough wings to suit you, if you want more'n one pair, and every day's a picnic with a snake feeder, you know. Nothing to do but just loaf up and down the creek and roost on reeds and cattails, or fool around a feller's fishing line and light up on the cork and bob up and down with it till she goes clean under, don't you know. Don't want to be no snake feeder dragonfly neither, said the boy, 'cause they gets gobbled up first thing they know by these here big green bullfrogs that they can't ever tell from the scum till they've lit right in their mouth, and then they're goners. No, sir, continued the boy, drawing an extra quinine bottle from another pocket and holding it up admiringly before his father's eyes. There's the feller in there that I'd rather be than have a pony. Why, it's a nasty poison spider, exclaimed Mr. Judkins, pushing back the bottle with affected abhorrence. And he's alive, too. You bet he's alive, said the boy, and you can bet he'll never come to no harm while I own him. And as the little fellow spoke, his face glowed with positive affection, and the twinkle of his eyes as he continued seemed wonderfully like his father's own. I tell you, I like spiders. Spiders is awful fat, all but their head, and that's level, you can bet. Flies ain't got no business with a spider. If a spider ever reaches for a fly, he's his meat. The spider, he likes to loaf and lay around in the shade and wait for flies and bugs and things to come a-fooling around his place. He lays back in the hole in the corner of his web and waits till something lights up on it, and then when he hears 'em buzzing, he just crawls out and fixes 'em so they can't buzz, and he's got the truck to do it with. I bet if you unwind all the web stuff out of this one little spider not bigger'n a pill, he'd be long enough for a kite string. Once there was a spider in our woodhouse, and a tater bug got stuck in his web, and the spider worked pert nigh 2 days 'fore he got him so he couldn't move. Then he couldn't eat him neither, 'cause they shells on 'em, you know, and the spider didn't know how to hull 'em. Every time I'd go there, the spider, he'd be a-wrapping more stuff around the old bug and stooping down like he was a-whispering to him. And one day I went in again, and he was a-hanging, alas and cold in death, and I poked him with a splinter and his web broke off. 'Spect he'd used it all up on the wicked bug and it killed him. And I buried him in an ink bottle and mashed the old bug with a chip. Yes, said Judkins, in a horrified tone, turning away to conceal the real zest and enjoyment his face must have betrayed. Yes, and someday you'll come home poisoned or something. And I want to say right here, my young man, if ever you do, and it don't kill you, I'll lint you within an inch of your life. And as the eccentric Mr. Judkins whirled around the corner of the porch, he heard the boy murmur in his low, absent-minded way, I expect you will. Mr. Judkins remarks. Judkins stopped us in front of the post office yesterday to say that that boy of his was the blamedest boy outside of the annals of history. Talk about this boy naturalist out here at Indianapolis, says Judkins. Why, he ain't nowhere to my boy. The little cuss don't do nothing either, only set around and look sleepy. And darn him, he gets off more dry things than you could print in your paper. Of late, he's been a-displaying a sort of weakness for nature, don't you know? And he's always got a bottle of bugs in his pocket. He come home yesterday evening with a blame mud turtle as big as an unabridged dictionary, and turned him over in the backyard and commenced biffing away at him with a hammer and a cold chisel. Why are you killing that turtle, says I. Kill nothing, says he. I'm just a-taking the lid off so I can see his clock works. Huh, says Judkins. He's a good one. Only, he added, I wouldn't have the boy think so for the world. Judkins' Boy on the Mud Turtle. The mud turtle is not a beast of prey, but he dearly loves catfish bait. If a mud turtle gets your big toe in his mouth, he will hang on till it thunders. Then he will spit it out like he was disgusted. The mud turtle can swim and keep his chin out of water if he wants to, but he don't care if he does sink. The turtle can stay underwater till his next birthday and never crack a smile. He can breathe like a grown person, but he don't have to, only when he is on dry land, and then I guess he just does it to be sociable. Always when you see bubbles a-comin' up in the swimming hole, you can bet your galluses they's a mud turtle a-layin' down there, studying up some cheap way to get his dinner. Mud turtles never dies, only when they make soup out of 'em. They is 7 kinds of meat in the turtle, but I'd rather eat plain burnt liver. The Boy on Frogs. Frogs is the people's friend, but they can't fly. Once they was tadpoles about as big as licorice drops, and after a while legs growed on 'em. Oh, let us love the frog. He looks so sorry. Frogs can swim better than little boys, and they don't have to hold their nose when they dive, neither. Once I had a pet frog, and the cars run over him. It just squished him. Bet he never knowed what hurt him. Once they was a rich lady swallered one, when he was little, you know, and he growed up in her, and it didn't kill him at all. And you could hear him holler in her bosom. It was a tree toad. And so every time he'd go a-purrin', why, then the grand lady she'd know it was gonna rain, and make her little boy run and put the tub under the spout. Wasn't that a beautiful frog? The Boy on Pirates. Pirates is reckless to a fault. They ain't afeard of nobody ner nothin'. If ever you insult a pirate once, he'll follow you to the grave until he revenges his wrong. Pirates all look like pictures of Buffalo Bill, only they don't shave off the whiskers that sticks out over the collar of their low-neck shirts. Every day is a picnic for pirates of the high seas. They eat gunpowder and drink blood to make 'em savage, and then they kill people all day and set up all night and tell ghost stories, and sing songs such as mortal ear would quail to listen to. Pirates never comes on shore, only when they run out of tobacco, and then it's a cold day if they don't land at midnight and disguise themselves and slip up in town like a sleuth hound so the grand jury can't get to 'em. They don't care for the police any more than us people who dwells right in their midst. Pirates make big wages and spends it like a king. Come easy, go easy, is the fatal watchword of them whose deeds is death. Once there was a pirate turned out of the house and home by his cruel parents when he was but a kid, and so he always went by that name. He was thrust adrift without a nickel, and sailed for distant shores to hide his shame for those he loved. In the dead of night he stole a new suit of the captain's clothes, and when he growed up big enough to fit him, he handsomely dressed himself and went up and paced the quarterdeck in deep thought. He had not forgot how the captain once had lashed him to the jib-boom poop and whipped him. That stung his proud spirit even then, and so the first thing he done was to slip up behind the cruel officer and push him overboard. Then the ship was his for better or worse, and so he took command and hung high upon the beetling mast the pirate flag. Then he took the Bible his old mother gave him and tied a darnick around it and sunk it in the sand with a mocking laugh. Then it was that he was ready for the pirate's wild seafaring life. He worked the pirate business for all they was in it for many years, but was run in at last. and standing on the gallows tree, he sung a song which was all wrote off by himself. And then they knocked the trap on him, and thus the brave man died and never made a kick. In life he was always careful with his means, and saved up vast wealth which he dug holes and buried, and died with the secret locked in his bosom to this day. The Boy on Hackmen, or Wagon Drivers. Hackmans has the softest thing in the business. They ain't got nothing to do but look hump-shouldered and chaw tobacco and wait. Hackmans all look like detectives and keep still and never even spits when you walk past 'em. And they're always cold. A hackman that stands high in the profession can wear an overcoat in dog days and then look chilly and like his folks was all dead but the old man and he was a drunkard. If a hackman would only be a blind fiddler, he'd take in more money than a fairground. Hackmans never gives nothing away. You can trust a hackman when you can't trust your own mother. Some people thinks when they hire a hack to take 'em someplace that the hackman's got some grudge agin 'em, but he ain't. He's always that way. He loves you, but he knows his place and smothers his real feelings. In life's giddy scenes, hackmans all wear a mask, but down deep in their heart you can bet they are yearn till death. Some hackmans look like they was stuck up, but they ain't. It's only 'cause they got on so much clothes. Once a hackman was stabbed by a friend of his in the same business, and when the doctors was seeing how bad he was carved up, they found he had on 5 shirts. They said that was all that saved his life. They said if he'd only had on 4 shirts, he'd been a dead man. And the hackman himself, when he got well, used to brag it was the closest call he ever had, and laid for the other hackman, and hit him with a car coupling and killed him, and come mighty nigh going to the penitentiary for it. Influential friends was all that saved him that time. No 5 shirts would have done it. The mayor said that when he let him off and brought down the house and made himself a strong man for another term. Some mayors is pretty slick, but a humble hackman may sometimes turn out to be just as smooth. The only thing why a hackman don't show up no better is 'cause he loses so much sleep. That's why he always looks like he had the headache and didn't care if he did. Once a hackman was waiting in front of a hotel one morning and was sort of dozing like and fell off his seat. And they run and picked him up and he was unconscious, and they worked with him till way long in the afternoon before they found out he was just asleep. And he cussed fearful 'cause they waked him up and wondered why people couldn't ever tend to their own business like he did. The Boy on Dudes. Everybody is always a-giving it to dudes. Newspapers make fun of 'em, and artists make pictures of 'em, and the only ones in the wide world that stuck on dudes is me and the dudes theirself, and we love and cherish 'em with all a parent's fond regards. And nobody knows much about dudes neither, 'cause they ain't been broke out long enough yet to tell just what the disease is. Some says it's softening of the brains, and others claim it can't be that, on the grounds they ain't got material for the softening to work on, etc., etc., till even scientists is puzzled, as the good book says. And if I was a-gonna say what ails dudes, I'd have to give it up, or pronounce it a aggravated case of typhoid blues, which is my honest convictions. That's what makes me kinda stand in with them, same as if they was the underdog. I am willing to acknowledge that dudes has their weakness, but so is everything, even Oscar Wilde if put to the test. And I always feel sorry for George Washington, 'cause he died 'fore he got to see Oscar Wilde. And then another reason why you ought not jump onto dudes is, they don't know what's the matter with them any more than us folks in whom they come in daily contact. Dudes all walks and looks in the face, like they was on their way to fill an engagement with a revolving lady wax figure and some milliner winder, and had forgot the number of her place of business. Some folks is mean enough to bitterly assert that dudes is strained in their manner and fools from choice. But they ain't. It's a gift. Dudes is geniuses. That's what dudes is. The boy on red hair. Once a poor boy was red-headed and got mad at the other boys when they'd throwed it up to him. And when they'd laugh at his red head and asked him for a light, or wasn't he afraid he'd singe his cap and ought to wear a tin hat or pretend to warm their hands by him, why, sometimes the red-headed boy'd get purty hot indeed. And once he told another boy that was baffling him about his red hair, that if he was him, he'd get a fine comb and go to canvassing his own head, and then he'd be liable to scare up a more livelier subject to talk about than red hair. And then the other boy says, "You're a liar," and that got the red-headed boy into more trouble, for the old man whipped him shameful for breaking up soil with the other boy. And this here red-headed boy had freckles too, and warts, and nobody oughtn't to jump on him for that. Once another boy told him if he was him, he bet he could make a big day look sick some night. And when the red-headed boy says how, while the other boy he says, "Easy enough, I'd just march around bareheaded in the torchlight procession." "Yes, you would," says the red-headed boy, and pasted him one with a shiny club, and got dispelled from school 'cause he was so high-tempered and impulsive. If I was the red-headed boy, I'd be a pirate, but he always says he was gonna be a baker. Mr. Judkins on the cross-eyed girl. "You don't want to never tamper with a cross-eyed girl," said Mr. Judkins, "and I'll tell you why. They've naturally got a better focus on things than a man would ever guess, studying their eyes, you understand. A man may think he's a fooling a cross-eyed girl simply because she's apparently got her eyes tangled on other topics as he's talking to her. But at the same time, that girl may be a-looking down the winding stairway of the cellar of his soul with one eye, and a-winking in a whisper to her own soul with the other, and her unconscious victim just a-taking it for granted that nothing is the matter with the girl, only just cross-eyes. You see, I've studied 'em," continued Judkins, "and I'm on to one fact dead sure, and that is, their natures is as deceiving as their eyes is. Knowed one once that had her eyes mixed up that-a-way, sensitive little thing she was, and always referring to her misfortune, as she called it, and eternally threatening to have some surgeon straighten 'em out like other folks. And, sir, that girl so worked on my feelings, and took such underholts on my sympathies that, blame me, before I knowed it I confessed to her that if it hadn't have been for her misfortune, I never would have thought of loving her. And furthermore, if ever she did have 'em changed back normal, don't you understand, she might consider our engagement at an end. I did, honest. And that girl was so absolute cross-eyed it warped her ears, and she used to amuse herself by watching 'em curl up as I'd be a-talking to her, and that maddened me, 'cause I'm naturally of a jealous disposition, you know, and so, at last, I just casually hinted that if she was really a-going to get them eyes carpentered up, why she'd better get at it, and that ended it. And then the blame girl turned right around and married a fella that had a better pair of eyes than mine this minute. Then I struck another cross-eyed girl. Not really a legitimate case, 'cause in reality, she only had one off eye, the right eye if I don't disremember, and the other one was as square as a gouge. And that girl was, if any difference, a more confusing case than the other. And besides all that, she had some money in her own right and warn't throwing off no big discount on one game eye. But I finally got her interested, and I reckon something serious might have come of it. But, you see, her father was dead, and her stepmother sort of shut down on my coming to the house. Besides that, she had 3 grown uncles, and you know how uncles is. I didn't want to marry no family, of course, and so I slid out of the scheme and tackled a poor girl that clerked in a post office. Her eyes was bad. I never did get the hang of them eyes of hers. She had purty hair and a complexion, I used to tell her, which outraveled the rose. But them eyes, you know. I didn't really appreciate how bad they was crossed at first. You see, it took time. Got her to give me her picture, and I used to cipher on that, but finally worked her off on a young friend of mine who wanted to marry intellect. Give her a good send-off to him, and she was smart. Only them eyes, you know. Why, that girl could read a postal card both sides at once and smile at a personal friend through the office window at the same time. Mr. Judkins on homesickness. There was a more than ordinary earnestness in the tone of Mr. Judkins as he said, referring to this thing of being homesick, I want to say right here that of all diseases, afflictions, or complaints, this thing of being homesick takes the cookies. A man may think when he's got an aggravated case of janders, or white swelling, say, that he's to be looked up to as being pretty well fixed in this vale of trouble and unrest. But I want to tell you, when I want my sorrow blood raw, don't you understand, you might give me homesickness. Straight goods, you know. And I'll get more clean legitimate agony out of that than you can get out of either of the other attractions. Yes, or even if you'd ring in the full combination on me. You see, there's no way of treating homesickness, only one. And that is to get back home. But as that's a remedy you can't get at no drugstore, it's so much per box. And if you could, for instance, and only had enough ready money anyhow to cover half the cost of a full box, and nothing but a full box ever reached the case, why, it follows that your condition still remains critical. And homesickness don't show no favors. It's just as liable to strike you as me. High or low, or rich or poor, all comes under her jurisdiction. And whenever she once reaches for a citizen, you can just bet she gets there, Eli, every time. She don't confine herself to youth or make no specialty of little children either. But she stalks abroad like a census taker, and is as conscientious. She visits the city girl clean up to Max and Cookie, and makes her wonder how things really is back home without her. And then she haunts her dreams, and wakes her up at all hours of the night, and sings old songs over for her, and talks to her in low thrilling tones of a young man whose salary ain't near big enough for 2. And then she leaves her photograph with her and comes away, and makes it lively for the boys on the train, the conductor, the brakeman, and the engineer. She even nests out the traveling man and yanks him out of his reclining chair and walks him up and down the car and runs him clean out of cigars and fine cut and smiles to hear him swear. Then she gets off at little country stations and touches up the night operator, who grumbles at his boy companion and wishes to darnation 6 was in so he could pound his ear. And I'll never forget, continued Mr. Judkins, the last case of homesickness I had and the cure I took for it. 'Tain't been more'n a week ago, neither. You see, my old home is almost too many laps from this place to make it very often. And in consequence, I hadn't been there for 5 years and better till this last trip, when I just succumbed to the pressure and throwed up my hands and went. Seemed like I'd have died if I hadn't. And it was glorious to rack around the old town again, things looking just the same, mighty nigh, as they was when I was a boy, don't you know. Run across an old schoolmate, too, and took supper at his happy little home, and then we got us a good nickel cigar and walked and talked and talked. Took me all around, you understand, in the meller twilight, till the first thing you know, there stood the old schoolhouse where me and him first learnt to chew tobacco and all that. Well, sir, you ain't got no idea the feelings that was mine. Why, I felt like I could throw my arms around the dear old building and squeeze it till the cupola would just pop out of the top of the roof. And I think if they ever was an epoch in my life when I could have tackled poetry without no compunctions, as the feller says, why, then was the time, sure. And that concludes James Whitcomb Riley's 1913 short collection of stories called The Judkins Papers. This is John T. Rhapsodies Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories. Thank you for listening. You can hear more stories like this in the channel's playlists. Find them by staying tuned for the last 20 seconds of this video and clicking on the end-screen icons. You can also go to the channel homepage and click on the playlist tab. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more, please help me earn the warm embrace of Mr. and Mrs. YouTubes, who look with loving favor upon those channels whose listeners faithfully download the YouTube app, subscribe to this channel, like, comment, click the notification bell, and share the videos with their friends, so that they too can hear the words of old.